And as good as that group has been, and as good as that offensive line group is, Jim Harbaugh says the defensive line has gotten the edge multiple times in fall camp.
Yep.
So if that doesn't make you giddy, right now, we know Chris Jenkins, monster, playing the defensive end in this defensive tackle role. Mason Graham coming back, only a sophomore. Kenneth Grant, another guy that lost weight and looks incredibly strong and thin at, I don't remember, I think he's 330 or whatever he is now, but those three guys are leading this group, and you've got elite talent at the top, but there's other guys behind them that are exciting as well. It isn't as deep as the offensive line, but they're so good at the trenches this year.
Yep. No, I agree. And good for Cam Good for getting back into, or not getting back, but ascending to be in the mix. I mean, he is firmly in the mix too. That's not just conjecture, that he is firmly in the mix. And that is from the coaching staff that has said that he's had a great camp and has worked his way up. And a guy also like Rayshon Benny too. Mike Elston has said that you're going to hear his name a lot this year. And there's a good reason for it. Has worked his way into this position. And, Michigan has some really interesting depth. Etta, Trey Pierce, both of those two guys have been called out by Harbaugh having good camps. I think the youth at end is going to be really intriguing. And I think they're in a good spot. Obviously, Mason Graham, you're looking to him to take a next step. And I think that next step is to create more of a pass rush. And that's been the goal for the entire line. That's not just a Mason Graham thing. That's a Chris Jenkins thing. That's a Kenneth Grant thing. So that's and according to those guys, they've been, working hard at it, and it's saying they've been effective with it this camp. So this will be the big thing to see if it can that'll translate to the season. But, you'd like to see Kenneth Grant take a next step here with this bigger role. And I think he will. Again, another mountain of a man that just is a space eater. He just eats up so much space. With Mason Graham's athleticism and obviously Chris Jenkins just is a beast. That's all I've heard all camp is how good Chris Jenkins has been. You should have a really good, 5 or 6 guys that are in rotation there that should be effective. And we're not even into the Jalen Harrells and the Braden McGregors of the world either, who kind of factor into the conversation too. So they're in a great spot, a good spot. And not as deep as the offensive line, but have about 6 or 7 guys that they can trust to trot out there and perform. So good, just good stuff. Just good stuff.
Quick side note on Chris Jenkins. I'm sure you guys saw that video of him doing the Turkish get up with the 170-pound dumbbell. Are you kidding me?
That's ridiculous.
He's a mutant. It's the best name ever.
It's ridiculous.
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I don't think people understand how insane that is.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But me personally, I'm definitely excited about this defensive line as a whole. And I think it starts with Jenkins. He's just ridiculously strong. I even saw a video when he was at Big Ten Media Days. They had this like grip strength tester thing where they had guys from all different teams squeeze it and they were getting pretty good scores. And then here comes Jenkins and he says, shout out Coach Herb. And then he just I think he maxed it out even maybe. So
so ridiculous.
He's unbelievably strong, and him paired with Mason Graham on the inside is just unbelievable. And then on the edge, I think it's really cool. There's 4 guys competing for 2 spots at the tackle.
That's coming up. Hold on.
Huh?
Edge is coming up. Hold on.
Oh, edge is coming up. Okay. I'm getting excited about the edge. I got a prediction there, but yeah, definitely Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. I want to see more consistency out of him too. I think he can be a big piece in the run game, especially. I don't know if he's quite there yet as a pass rusher, but definitely a big piece in the run game.
Yeah, Jenkins could lead the team in sacks this year. That's how good he could be in the pass rush. He's a 5th-year guy. I've talked about this before. There is such a big difference when you're getting a guy back who's that talented in a 5th year. He is a grown man, right? Like he's 23. He's an NFL talented player at this point. He could have gone to the NFL last year. He could be a 1st-round pick this year. Like that is just a massive advantage. And I'm with you. Grant got a little vertical last year, had a couple little hiccups, but he could have had arguably a very similar path to Mason Graham, except for he had a guy named Mozzie Smith in front of him. And Mozzie didn't come off the field at all last year. That's going to be an interesting piece for me with the rotations is, does Jenkins basically just stay on the field like Mozzie did? But, Mozzie was the nose tackle last year. And now your 3rd defensive tackle is Grant. He's the nose tackle. He's lost some weight, done some conditioning. How is tempo going to affect these guys if they get caught on the field, right? So, yeah, how they rotate him is going to be really intriguing for me. And, yeah, I'm with you, Josh. Rayshon Benny's a guy that I think we always kind of pegged as a junior year blow-up kind of guy. So I don't think Graham necessarily jumped him or whatever. I just think this is where we thought Benny would show up and make some noise. So let's move on to edge because Brock can hardly contain himself. Brock, I'll let you go first. As you said, we have another Michigan method here at the edge. So the rush or strong side edge position is going to be Braden McGregor, or another guy that's lost weight and looks crazy good as Derek Moore. And then on the weak side, or the Sam linebacker, the David Ajabo role, if you will, we've got Jalen Harrell and Josiah Stewart. So obviously we have a clear top 4, and we're going to see. This is one where I don't know that a starter is ever necessarily going to be declared either, because there's going to be rotation throughout the season with these guys.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot more rotation than say on the offensive line. And it's really interesting to me that you have 4 guys competing for 2 spots at tackle, and then you got 4 guys competing for 2 spots at edge. And obviously the edges naturally rotate more, but I'm really excited about Braden McGregor. He's ever since he stepped foot on campus, he's been compared to Aiden Hutchinson, both, just physically and how he plays the game. And I'm really excited. I don't know if he'll have, he won't have, I'll say, as big of a year as Hutch had in 2021, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was maybe a David Ojabo or maybe just a little bit less. I think he could approach 10 sacks. There were many instances last year where he was right there. Like he was just an inch away from a sack or like a strip sack. So I think if he just finds it, and he said the other day at when he met with the media that he finally started feeling like himself at the end of last year. And so I'm really excited about him. I think Josiah Stewart, I'm excited what he can bring to the table. I want to see, I haven't watched any of his film at Coastal Carolina or anything like that, but I'm excited to see what he can do. And people have kind of been doubting his smaller frame at 6'1", but I want to see, because Jesse Minter was talking about it the other day, how different guys have different skill sets. So
he's the exact same size as Josh Uche. So
yeah,
height and weight. There you
go.
Yep. I want to show you. Sorry, I want to show you this real quick. I tweeted this a while back for those that are watching on YouTube. The McGregor and Hutch comparisons. Look at this. Like,
they're
the same dude. It's crazy.
Yeah. No, good for McGregor too to get back into fight back from injury and just to be in this position. I think is really good, and for waiting it out, for being patient and waiting it out. Good for him. He deserves all the good stuff that comes his way this year. That undoubtedly will happen. I mean, you're going to hear his name a lot. And I do want to. Someone asked a question here in the chat that I want to answer real quick because I saw it. And have you guys heard anything from Etta? Yeah, I mean he's going to factor in on a defensive end but you got Chris Jenkins there. I mean, you're not going to be. It's hard to find.
I think he's this year's Kenneth Grant. I think he's absolutely talented enough to be a contributor early.
Yeah,
but he's behind a guy like Chris Jenkins.
Yep.
Derek Moore was a guy I kind of pegged for maybe being a flex in that role because of how big he was. He was arguably going to get bigger. He might be what Mike Morris was in 21, a dude that can play the edge and inside.
Right.
But Derek Moore lost 20-something pounds.
Yeah, he looks good.
And he's ready to kill it at that strong side edge spot. So
no, he looks good. Again, I mean, there's so many guys that you can rotate in, health is going to be the big thing. Is can you keep these guys healthy? And this kind of goes into Scott's question here. Can Stewart hold up over the course of a Big Ten season? I think he absolutely could, just because of the fact they have so many guys. We haven't even talked about TJ Guy, who's had a huge camp, who's going to be factoring in. There's a couple other guys in there that, I can't think of at the top of my head that have had good camps. Thank you very much. Breon Ishmael coming into camp at 260 as a true freshman. I mean, my God.
Yeah, we were wondering if he was going to be at linebacker or edge, and there was 30-something pounds later.
Kuba is an interesting guy, too. I haven't heard anything super specific, but he's a guy that is very raw and has a ton of potential that could possibly see the field this year in some sort of limited roles. Keyshawn Bennett is another guy that I've heard has had a good camp who's factoring into. But, when you have guys like Braden McGregor, Derek Moore, Jalen Hurrell, Josiah Stewart, all those guys are going to command so much playing time that, you really have to earn playing time. And I really think TJ Guy is that guy that can shuffle in and spell some guys too. I think he's had that good of a camp. So ton of intriguing guys, but yeah, Breon Ishmael's size coming in as a true freshman. I don't know if he'll play, but I mean, talk about like starting off on the right foot and being a good size already. I mean, that bodes pretty well for his future.
Brock, I cut you off earlier. Do you remember what you were going to say?
I was just going to talk about Jalen Harrell and how he's very consistent both in the run game and in the pass rush, and I think he's bound to have a big year. And I guess going back to TJ Guy a little bit, I'm pretty sure when Jesse Minter was meeting with the media last week maybe or a couple weeks ago, TJ Guy was the first edge guy he named after that top 4. Yeah. So definitely excited to see what he can bring to the table.
He's a guy who had a strong spring even last year and didn't really translate in. So, yeah, I could see him being in the rotation. And Brock, back to what you said about Stewart, I have watched a lot of film on him at Coastal Carolina. I did an article really early on about him because I was surprised there was such a production drop-off in terms of sacks. It's a guy that had double-digit sacks as a freshman. But you look at Pro Football Focus and a lot of the analytical stuff graded out the same, and I was confused. So I watched a lot of his tape, and his freshman year, he played a role almost identical to what he's going to play this year. And then sophomore year, they moved him to like a jack, more of an outside linebacker. He lost 15 pounds. He was down to 230, and he created a lot of pressure, but it was almost like his job became pushing the QB into the other guys. Mm-hmm. So everyone else was racking up the sacks, and he wasn't because they were starting him so far off the line. So watch the highlights. This guy isn't just a speed guy. He is a speed guy. He's got a great center of gravity, good dip move, but he will bull rush dudes at 6'1", 245 and push dudes over. I think worst case scenario, he's looking at a Josh Uche role, like I said, where he's a factor in the pass rush. Harrell, like you said, has really become a more well-rounded edge player. So he's a guy I think can stay out, run, and pass. And then, man, pick your choosing with McGregor or Moore. Either one of those dudes could be, like you said, not Hutchinson, number 2 overall draft pick, but I could see double-digit sacks from either one of those two dudes. It's just a wealth of riches at the top. I think you love having 4 and you want the rotation, but I think you'd also really like to see one guy break out, or, like you had with Hutch and Ojabo. If you go back to some of those games, they were winning because they were getting third down sacks, right? Yep. I think it'd be nice to have somebody like that. Franklin made an appearance, and it sounds like we heard some puppy barking too there, Josh. He's back.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, you're good, man.
Puppy stirring. So I had to make sure he was good, but that was mostly Franklin, of course, because I can't go a whole podcast without Franklin barking.
That's probably the longest we've gone, though.
Yeah. It's a solid hour. Who knows? It's an hour.
I appreciate it.
That's it.
All right. Let's move on to the linebackers. This is a group that, I don't mean this as a shot, but it was probably the weak spot of a very, very good defense last year. Just from a depth standpoint, Junior Colson and Michael Barrett did everything they could, being pretty much the only 2 linebackers, right? Yeah. This year, they're both back, so that's already a huge addition. And then you bring in Ernest Hausman from Nebraska, who's going to be working in a role behind Barrett, getting plenty of reps as well. And then one of the stories of the spring, Josh, I would say, is the guy now arguably backup Mike, Jaden Hood.
Yeah. Yeah, he's had a great camp. From all sides of it, Jaden Hood is, I would say he's probably the surprise offender in fall camp, and it's not even close. You're talking about a Mike position where Jimmy Rolder saw a lot of time last year, and now Jaden Hood might be on top of the depth chart over Rolder. So that's great news for a defense, or a linebacker position that needed depth.
Yeah.
In the worst way. And obviously adding Houseman to the mix is huge. And, to give kind of Mike Barrett a spell a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the best case scenario is Jaden Hood living up to that, ascending fall camp hype. I think that'll be huge for Colson, who, was banged up a little bit last year because he had to play so much. So if you kind of spell Colson, you could spell Barrett, with guys like Houseman and Hood and Rolder too. That's a great scenario. And all of a sudden, you gone from a linebacker position where you kind of question where it was headed to now you're like, okay, now they've potentially got some guys. They've potentially got some depth. So, all of these question marks kind of seem to be answering themselves at this point. I think we were talking about coming into this year, like, hey, what's up with the linebacker position, and then Houseman comes in. Now you're kind of like, well, what do they have behind Colson? Is it Houseman backing up Colson and Barrett? Now Hood is emerging, and you've got Rolder, so it's great news all around. And again, especially if Hood can live up to that hype, you're in a great spot for sure. Frankly,
go ahead, Brad.
One thing I wanted to point out, Junior Colson was talking with the media the other day, and he was raving about Jaden Hood. He said he's one of the last guys in Schembechler, like every day watching film, and Colson said he's always asking questions. He's always trying to learn more, and I guess that's where some of his emergence and ascension has come from, is that he's putting in the work. He's asking questions. One of the last guys in the room every night, and looking for a big season out of him, even if he's in that backup role. And then Ernest Houseman, I've heard some mixed reviews about him. I've heard when he first committed said he was going to be potentially a starter on this team. And I've heard other people say, maybe pump the brakes a little bit and that dog's going crazy. But
I think that was just reeling in expectations. Houseman was ranked one of the best transfers of the transfer portal. So I think people thought like Houseman's coming in and he's starting over Barrett and he's going to lead the team in tackles.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was ever the case. Right. So it's not necessarily that mixed reviews on him per se. I just think kind of resetting expectations. Yeah. He's in the same boat as Jimmy Rolder. Right. Like he's a guy that he played a lot more at Nebraska than Rolder did, but he's entering his sophomore year. He's got all the talent, just needs to refine some skills or whatever. And
yeah.
Early in the year, he could be a big factor, but I think mid-season, end of the year, Houseman's going to be right there.
For sure.
Colson's my defensive player of the year pick. I think he's going to take a big, big step up going into a junior year. I think you're going to see from a football IQ standpoint, he's going to start to get into that territory of a Josh Ross. But he has the talent of a Devin Bush, right? Like he's going to lead the team in tackles again. I think they have a chance to let him impact the pass rush more. I don't think they want to do it a lot. I don't think Minter's not a guy that likes sending 6 dudes. If they can create pressure with only 4 or 5 and not have to blitz a ton, that's the goal. But you feel a lot better about the middle of the defense this year than maybe you did last year with Barrett back, Colson, and then Hood was in the same class as Colson.
Yeah,
it's kind of crazy. It's crazy to think about, but yeah, they were. When the whole Brian Jean Mary thing went down, it was like trying to keep these 2 guys in the fold. And it's funny how, their ascension has been different, but Hood was a really good player. He was a high recruit. Like he wasn't, he kind of got forgot about because of the Colson rise, but it's good to see him there. And then I don't know if we mentioned Micah Pollard, but he's a guy that's been kind of in an in-between role for a little bit on the edge and playing some linebacker. And he's a guy that I think can be a good, solid contributor, just, again, adding depth. But it'll be interesting to see defensively if, with this amoeba defense being able to do different looks, now that you have depth at this position, do we see 3 linebackers on the field at the same time? Something you wouldn't have seen last year, right? That's for sure. So another position battle that's going to bleed into the season, arguably throughout the season. This might not be one that gets settled for a while, and that's at cornerback. So Michigan knows what they have at CB1, arguably the best corner in the Big Ten, Will Johnson. They know what they have at nickel. Mike Sainer still back this year. They've got a lot of options at CB2. We've seen a little bit of clarity with a week to go, but Josh, this is one where guys are going to rotate through the first few games of the year.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we know what we have, or know what, what they have in Will Johnson, and what's out there. But I mean, the big question, CB2, I mean, Josh Wallace, Morion Walker, was part of that conversation and still is, but he ended up getting hurt in camp. Nothing serious, but that set him back a little bit. And Josh Wallace was able to capitalize. And I kind of said a couple of weeks ago that if Josh Wallace was able to secure a starting spot, I think that's the best case scenario for Michigan, because you can kind of you can give guys like Morion Walker a chance to kind of go at his own pace. McBurrows can get out there. Keyshawn Harris, his name always seems to be brought up.
It's been around the program for a long time.
Yeah, Miles Pollard too. So I think if you bring in Josh Wallace with the purpose of adding depth, and he ends up being your second best corner, I think that's a great situation. And then obviously Mike Sainer still can do a bunch of different things for you too. So there's options there, and Will Johnson leading the way. The onus is going to be on someone stepping up at CB2, because not many people are going to throw at Will Johnson. If they are, they're very brave. And so we'll see, and maybe Sainer still gets into the mix at CB2 as well. So they have options, and I think, we'll see what the depth chart looks like here in about a week or so. But, by all means, I mean, they're not trotting Josh Wallace out to the media just for, S&Gs.
Great point.
They're not doing that just for fun. I mean, he's obviously, effective, and he's seen a lot of football, played against a lot of high-level competition, because UMass is an independent, so they can kind of play all these different bunch of guys. So, yeah, very intriguing for Josh Wallace and his outlook at CB2 for a year. And he could end up being the perfect bridge player for a guy like Morion Walker, who might need a little bit more seasoning and to kind of go at his own pace.
Yeah, talk about knowing what you're getting. We talked a little bit about it earlier with Cornelius Johnson, but Will Johnson is a guy, what you're going to get week in and week out. He's gonna lock down one half of the field, and like you said, Josh, you're brave if you throw at him. He's gonna lock it down, and whether it be Marvin Harrison Jr., which I can't wait to see that matchup later on in the year, or any other Big Ten receiver, he's gonna do his best to clamp that guy down. I do think Josh Wallace has the edge at the CB2 spot right now, just because of his experience. Jaden McBurrows and Keyshawn Harris and Morion Walker, these guys, Miles Pollard, they're all young, and Josh Wallace has the experience there. Morion Walker's a guy, I'm really bummed to hear he got hurt in camp, because he can't really afford to be hurt.
Right.
He's fighting for that spot, and he's got to prove that he's working on all the technicalities that it takes to play corner, and he didn't have a whole lot of time to waste. He needed a strong fall camp if he wanted that second corner spot, and for him to be hurt it's kind of hurting him. We'll see if he gets healthy and maybe emerges later on in the season and maybe bumps Wallace. But I do think maybe not a nightmare scenario, but something the staff doesn't want to have happen is to move Mike Sainer still to corner. I think they really like him at nickel.
Yeah,
and I think that was the whole reasoning behind bringing in Josh Wallace, was we don't want to move Mike Sainer still. We like him at nickel. He was a stud last year. And if we bring in Wallace, maybe he can he can handle that second corner spot, and we can keep Mike there at nickel. I think that's kind of what the staff was thinking with that. I'm really excited to see Zeke Berry. He made one play last year. It may have been in the non-conference, but it looked like he shot out of a cannon and tackled a guy for a loss. So really excited about him. I know he may be a leading candidate for the nickel spot next year. So yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing what he brings.
Yeah, I've said throughout the offseason, very similar to the offensive line. You want to play your best guys and then figure it out. And if Mike Sainristil is your second best corner and Zeke Berry can rise and be that nickel, then you can flex those guys around, right?
Yeah.
Will Johnson can play nickel. Zeke can play nickel. Sainristil can. Rod Moore, we'll get to the safeties in a moment. He's a guy that's going to be a factor in coverage, led this team in interceptions last year. He can come up as well. But Harbaugh said it best. This team's at its best when Mike Sainristil's at nickel. So I think that was great to hear him say, because coming into fall camp, I think they were prepared for a scenario where Sainristil was arguably the outside corner, and maybe they are doing something with a third safety or Zeke Berry or even 3 linebackers. And Josh Wallace, to his credit, like Josh said, it's not an accident that they're bringing him out for these press appearances, right? He immediately linked up with Sainristil as soon as he got here. They have some connections in the Northeast area, and he's just been on his hip the whole time. He's been learning everything he can. And yeah, this is a guy that started for 4 years. He was a captain for 2 years, right? He's no slouch. So I equated it to, it's almost like Jamon Green came back this year. I think that's what you're getting by adding Josh Wallace. I think you were fine with the talents and the young players you had, but you didn't have that experience. So could a guy like McBurrows push him throughout the year? Maybe. I think McBurrows is still going to be a factor, especially in run game. He's a force. He hurt himself laying a hit in 2021. So he's a physical dude. Harris is just a nice, what you've got, consistent guy. He's not going to lock down, but he's been around the program for a while. So what you don't want, I think, is what both of you guys hinted at, which is a great opportunity to ignore Will Johnson. If you've got a spot over there where you feel like you can pick on a guy, that could be a problem, right? I think DJ Turner, as good as he is, we saw him get beat over the top a few times last year, Green as well. So having that extra safety help will be helpful. But if Josh Wallace can come in and provide some real stability at that second corner spot, now you're turning the ball over, because you are throwing it and Rod Moore is coming up and getting a pick, or you are throwing it at Will Johnson. And that's where I think this defense takes the next step. As good as they've been in terms of yards and limiting points, turnovers has still been a thing Steve Klingscale has been talking about since he got to Ann Arbor, right? So let's move on to that back end of the defense. Let's talk about safety. This is another spot. Again, this is a loaded roster, a lot of returning talent, right? We know what Michigan has at the starting spot. Rod Moore, best safety in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country. Bakari Page at the other safety spot. What a great story. We've talked about him a bunch, but coming on and earning that job for Moton last year, and just a solid big body safety back there. But there's some competition. This team likes to play 3 safeties. Josh, I know you're a big fan of Keon Sabb, and I've got Zeke Berry factored into this as well. Brock, like you mentioned. But Rod Moore, I know we've kind of talked about the depth, and I've set that up. I want you to talk about that as well. But Rod Moore got bigger and stronger as well this offseason, and he's already the best tackler on this team. I think he's going to be even better than we realize this year.
Yeah, he's a guy that we really haven't talked about at all this offseason. We talk about the Chris Jenkins, the Will Johnsons, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. We talk about all these guys, JJ, and we don't really talk about Rod Moore. And we should. That's and absolutely should talk more. But that's just kind of who Rod Moore is, though. I mean, it's just like a guy that quietly just does his job and does it well. You don't hear his name called very often unless he's, making a big play or getting a pick.
Which is what you want from your safety.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the third year, Rod Moore should have a big year. A dependable guy, a guy that's just come in and worked, and, probably one of the best students of the game that Jim Harbaugh has on his roster, probably. And what for Makari Page, what better person to learn from than Rod Moore and guys like Mike Samerstill too. So, another year in this defensive scheme for Makari Page is huge for him. Some consistency again, and you saw him starting to figure it out, and I think he should take another step forward. And the sky's the limit for this group. I mean, if you can get a Keon Sabb worked in there too, again, bodes really well for the future, because who knows if Rod Moore is going to be here next year. If he has another good year, he could be very well off to the NFL. So, and you could maybe make the same argument for Makari Page. Probably not yet, but there's that conversation to be had. And to get a guy like Keon Sabb ready, would be huge. Kolazar is in the mix. Brandon Hillman too is another guy that is probably a bit young and a little bit out, but Zeke Berry is proven that he can make some plays. He had a nice spring game, and Quentin Johnson is always a guy that seems to be talked about.
He played a lot last year.
Yeah, not necessarily on the field, but a guy that has had the admiration of the coaching staff and his players. A guy that's been around, seen everything, and can give you a lot of things from an experience standpoint. Maybe he sees the field a little bit, but yeah, I mean, you can't get better right now than Rob Moore and Makari Page from Michigan as safety. And if you can add a third guy in there like a Keon Sabb, then you're sitting really pretty.
Josh, something you said, it was funny to me because you said Makari Page or Rod Moore is a good guy for Makari Page to learn from.
Page
Correct
is
me
older.
if I'm wrong, but Makari Page was a 2020 guy, and Rod Moore was 2021. So I think that speaks to how good Rod Moore is.
Absolutely, 100%.
Even as a true junior, he was playing. I don't know if he started, but he was playing consistently as a freshman, and he was
filling in when Dax was hurt.
Yep.
Yeah, he was playing in the Ohio State game, and so that dude's a stud. Rod Moore is going to lead the team in interceptions.
One of the best pictures of that game was Rod Moore, and who was it? JSN he was up against.
Yeah. Rod Moore, he's my pick to lead the team in interceptions. I think Will Johnson's certainly a candidate, but I think teams are going to be so afraid to throw his way that he may not get as many opportunities. But
right,
I think Rod Moore had 4 interceptions last year.
Yep.
I think he could push for 6. I think he's that talented. I think he's a stud. And Makari Page, like I said, he's a year older, but he's definitely solid. Excited to see what he can bring. And Josh, I know you're the president of the Keon Sabb fan club, but I think I'm going to petition for co-president because I'm excited about him.
I didn't even mention Jair Hill with the corners.
No, that's actually, that's a good, Jair Hill.
That's the fan club he's the president of.
Yeah, Jair Hill, Cam Calhoun, both of those guys I like a lot. It's just, there's again,
there's so many guys.
Yeah, there's just depth, and it's just great. It's just a great problem to have. We'll see what that depth looks like after this year, because there's going to be a ton of turnover on this team. So, we talk about how great the depth is now. We'll see what it looks like a year from now, and if they're set up to continue on what this trajectory Michigan's on. But it's fun to talk about right now, at least.
Well, and that's why, I mean, obviously the Natty is the goal, and you want to do everything with that goal in mind. But if you can get a lot of snaps for these younger guys, you feel a lot better about 2024 as well. I know everybody's predicting this massive drop-off for 24. So, well, keep in mind, you don't know what these young guys can do yet.
Right.
You haven't seen them, right? So even some of the names we're talking about today, Makari Page was playing behind RJ Moten last year. Everyone thought he was going to transfer. You brought up the 2020 season, Brock. I've told this story a bunch because I just think it's just incredible. He was thrown to the Wolves in 2020, was not ready, had a really difficult year. 21, he sees Rod Moore, start and jump him, right? And he sticks around, and now he's a fixture on this defense. I think it's an awesome story. And Rod Moore, little 3-star recruit from Ohio. We didn't even want him. Ohio State fans, we didn't even want him. You don't win a recruiting battle because we didn't offer him. Well, thanks for not offering him. We appreciate
Those are the type of guys that Michigan in years past did so well with
100%.
on the field is those guys, those 3-star guys that Ohio State passed on. Even you can make an argument that Ohio State passed on Jake Butt too, and that's kind
I'll
of
make an argument they did.
Yeah. So it's that if you can get back to that,
he was friends with the tight end coach's kid, dude.
Right?
How do you miss on Jake Butt?
Right,
Crazy.
right.
Anyway,
Exactly.
sorry.
So, yeah, those kind of guys. I mean, this is a totally different conversation for another day. But those kind of guys that are pissed off at Ohio State are the type of kids that end up doing really well in Michigan. 9 times out of 10, they're
keep sleeping on Jaden Davis, folks.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I'm with you on the interceptions, Brock. I think Rod Moore and Will Johnson. Once we saw Will Johnson became CB1, basically Ohio State Big Ten championship game. And sorry. put that up real quick. Pup looking tired. Yeah, for those of you watching.
He was yipping in his crate, so I had to,
oh my
he's
God.
a baby. I have to I have to make sacrifices.
But yeah. So Will Johnson gets 2 interceptions, Big Ten championship game. Rod Moore had the one against TCU. Those two have already been talking about being in a little bit. They talked about it on the BTN bus tour that they're going to compete for most interceptions this year. I think they're going to be an incredible tandem. I think they're going to feed off each other really well in terms of filling gaps and, handing players off. And it's going to be fun to watch. But I'm with you. I think either one of them could crack that 5 number. And that could be a real game changer for this defense if we start to see multiple interceptions in the back end. And that comes right back up to the front. If they're creating more consistent pass rush and forcing some bad throws, we're going to move to the special teams in a second, but just because we're having this conversation and I'm thinking about it, doesn't have to be yes or no, but kind of a quick thought. I think this defense is going to be not just better than last year, but as much as we talk about the offense this whole offseason, and I do think they're going to be good, I think the defense is going to lead this team. What do you guys?
I think
better than last year, lead over offense. What do you think?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, you would hope that the offense takes a step forward.
For sure.
But yeah, I'm not worried about the offense scoring points. I think I'm worried about opposing offenses scoring points on a youthful secondary that has a big question mark right now. That's kind of the big thing. And if Michigan can answer that question, I think that kind of quells a lot of fears for a lot of people. So do I think, I think the defense can lead this team, and I think they will. I think they have to factor in the CB2 role too. So, and an effective pass rush can help that too. So it kind of goes hand in hand. So, I think we kind of know what the offense can do. The defense is going to have to shut some things down.
I'm going to use a Jim Harbaugh term here. I definitely think the defense has the license and ability to be better than last year. They
They're
lost.
Vibrant.
Yeah, they lost Mozzie Smith, Mike Morris, DJ Turner for the most part, starting on defense. You replace Mozzie Smith with guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. You bring in Josiah Stewart to replace Mike Morris, and Derek Moore can hopefully take that next step. And then you bring in Josh Wallace to replace DJ Turner. And apart from that, everyone's a year older. You bring back almost everyone. So I definitely think the defense could and probably will be better than last year.
I think year 3 of the defensive scheme and year 2 with Jesse Minter is a huge piece of this too.
Yep.
There was Don Brown to McDonald to Minter, and the defense held really well with those transitions. Now Minter back for another year with a lot of the same dudes, like you said, Brock. There's not a ton of turnover on this defense. I think not only are they more comfortable with the defense, I think they're more comfortable with their players as well. And I think you're going to see them get a little more creative, just like the offense has been talking about being explosive and such. So they had more sacks last year than they did in 21, but they didn't have the guy like Hutch or Ajabo. And if you looked at when they got those sacks, it was definitely against weaker competition. So just like the offense, I think they got to be more consistent. I think they have the potential. So